Hello, you guys, and oh my goodness, I thought that this was a perfect opportunity to go over some social commentary slash psychology. That might be putting it too firm a note on it. I'm not going to be talking about psychology so much as what we witnessed in the news today, or if you watched the show, which I didn't, on Will Smith and Jada Pinkett and Chris Rock. I should say Will Smith and Chris Rock, and the kind of punch in the face that happened. And so, what I want to talk about is what we actually witnessed, because in healing, we talk a lot about trauma and pain and reactions. And I often am working with people to not react, but to respond. And what we saw last night, well, we could have just foreseen that this is something that was going to happen because there were a few things that happened before that. So I'm not one to really follow a lot of the social stuff that's going on in Hollywood, but through my son and other people, I've heard about different things going on with Will Smith and Jada. I was surprised. I thought they were already divorced, but I guess they made it through and they stayed together. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but they did seem like a couple in the news that I saw last night on, the punch that was heard around the world. So I know in the past they have had some problems. I know there was an infidelity that kind of was on the world stage. And as public people, it has to be extremely difficult to go through these kind of really, really personal things, dealing with your own heartbreaks and feelings of betrayal. And then on top of that, having family, children who are also being part of this and being brought into this, having your world blasted on the news. So they've already gone through years of that. And then when I saw what was going on, and I saw Chris Rock make that joke about her hair, and I hadn't followed them for years, and I wondered, oh no, was this reaction because she's sick in some way? I didn't know. I just know her head was shaved. And so, right away I thought maybe she had cancer. And I thought, well, goodness gracious, if she has cancer, that is not going to be something that's going to go over well. You don't make fun of someone sick. Well, I did some research and found out she doesn't have cancer, but she is battling something. She's battling alopecia, which of course is not as severe as cancer, but it doesn't really matter. It's all relative because Will is witnessing his wife going through something that is traumatic for her. And it would be for any of us if we thought about today, we just started losing all of our hair just coming out, right? Because everyone knows our hair is our identity, a lot of it. We go out and get haircuts and, my hair, I do my hair a certain way. And if I just one day didn't have any hair, that would be really traumatic for me. And my husband would be feeling that trauma for me. He would be aware of every personal conversation, every tear I would shed, every emotion that I would be experiencing as a result of going through that. He would be in on. He would be feeling my pain for me and my insecurities and just all my emotions, right? He would know all of that, the stuff that nobody else sees. Now, I went online and I researched Jada to see, well, what's going on with her hair? What is alopecia again? And I watched a few of her videos. She does a thing called Red Table where her daughter is also with her and other people, which I thought was amazing to have your own daughter there with you, kind of bonding on matters that matter, right? I just loved that whole premise, and seeing the sensitivity of her daughter talking about this for her mom, and then her mom talking about why she was wearing all the turbans and stuff. And so it became very clear that although it's not life-threatening, it is still a trauma because our bodies are the way we go through life. It is how we view ourselves, how we know other people are viewing us visually, and having to shift into adjusting to a different perception of ourself, having to shift in understanding that other people are now going to perceive us differently, and the fears and the emotions and the tears of not being in control of something that has never been a problem. That's a lot of trauma and emotion to go through. And Will he's had a front row seat to all of this pain and trauma she's going through. And so we can't minimize this and look at it as a simple thing, just as hair. Men go through this too, right? And I was listening to these men commentaries talking about this, that, people joke about males and males being bald or males wearing wigs, and people joke about that, but you can't joke about it with a woman. I don't even think you can joke about it with a man, because it is just as traumatic for a man to lose his hair as it is for a woman. So I just thought that this was really interesting, not only on that note about being sensitive to all people and their identity issues, right? Because all of this is about identity issues and the sensitivities to that on a full spectrum of identity issues. We're just talking about hair, but this really fits into everything. Be sensitive, okay? And talking now about the trauma. Not only, and I looked at her face, she rolled her eyes. She did a hard eye roll. This hit her hard. She did not want to hear that or be the butt of a joke. Okay, now think about this from Will. He's seen his wife go through all this trauma, how painful and how it's shifted her identity. She's had to regroup what her identity is, reformat it, reimagine her identity, and find some sort of self-confidence in it. And she's been obviously working very hard at that and publicly putting it out there because she's in the limelight regardless. She can't hide it. So she had to partner with it and adapt to it, and then figure out how to have self-confidence in it. And she's been doing that through her show and with her daughter, and whatever she's been doing. I only watched a few things, but clearly she's been making an effort to own it so that she could walk through her life in her being and own her identity, however it has shifted. And now we go and look at her husband, who has had a front row seat to her pain and trauma. And you have two people that are in the limelight. They've also had other traumas of having their whole life blasted in front of the news. And some would say that's part of the deal. You're famous, you're in the limelight. That's part of the deal. Yeah, I guess so. That doesn't mean that it's not traumatic. That does not mean that you are not going to be triggered by someone doing that. Okay. And what we witnessed was Will Smith being triggered. So all the past, seeing his wife really suffer through the changes that she's really worked hard to adapt to, find her footing in her new identity of self, and getting the support of her family. But he's no doubt witnessed a lot of tears, stuff we don't see. And then here comes somebody making a joke. Now, in itself, I listened to it, and the joke, it's TV, right? Plus, I think her hair looks awesome. And the G.I. Jane, I think of Demi Moore. She shaved her head, right? She looked awesome. And so in itself, he wasn't making fun of how she looked, actually. He was just making a joke. And that was his job to do, to make jokes, make people laugh. And of course, all comedians pick on people. but they've had a lot of trauma, and that's where it all went sideways. And as soon as he said it, I was like, oh boy. Yeah, I could see where this is going to go sideways, because knowing the past trauma and then looking at her and not knowing whether or not she has an illness that makes her hair that way, and finding out, yeah, she does have some kind of illness that's making it that way. I was not surprised by what I saw. Now, this goes into respond, not react. When you feel like you want to react, it's based on a trigger, and you got to have something that blocks you. And in that case, everything that was being said about her hair went out to the world. And he didn't want that broadcasted, and it triggered something in him. Because here it is, that I think it also probably could have triggered some of that, DNA of, protection. And his flight response just kicked up, and he just did what he did, right? So do I think he was right in doing that? No, this isn't about that. This is about really witnessing what the trigger was, because I'm talking more from a healing standpoint and from a psychological standpoint of why the trigger happened to begin with. There's a whole groundwork of why the trigger happened. And in order to not be triggered by stuff, we kind of have to prep ahead of time, right? So knowing that, especially sitting in the front, it looked like they were sitting pretty close, to understand that, okay, some of these things might be brought up by the comedian. How am I going to prepare myself for things that might be brought up that's going to touch on the very thing that I might be triggered by? So being prepared as much as you can, knowing what your triggers are, knowing them, and then asking yourself, in the event that I'm triggered, how am I going to handle that? Okay, it's a little tougher there, because you can't break out my emotional audit form and start writing it at a table at the Oscars, right? But having a mindset to be prepared for what could happen, and even as a partnership, saying this is what could happen. These things could be brought up. How are we going to handle it? And then you talk about those things, how you're going to handle it as a team. What's the mindset you're going to have when it happens, so that you already immediately go into the mindset instead of focusing on the trigger and then that heat of it rising, right? To where you rise out of your seat and what happened. So I'm not surprised that happened. It was a trigger, and we got to see the light of day on it, to see that. And so what we want to do is we want to respond and not react. And in order to do that, see, I always say that responding means we own our power, and reacting means we gave it away. And so if you want to own your power, you have to respond. And sometimes that requires you do what I call sleep on it. You sleep on it. You log it and you sleep on it. And if you wake up the next day and it bothers you, then you have a conversation with somebody, okay? And you might realize that they're not worth the conversation, or it was just a joke. It's kind of what they were there to do, and it really wasn't that big of a deal. And you can see it for, it was talking about the haircut, not so much he didn't, you know what I mean? You can look at the situation, and then you can kind of decide the level of heat. Was it a 10, or was it really just a 5? And if it's a 5 or lower, you let it go, right? You can decide that when you're responding, but when you're reacting, it's all heat. And then what happens, and then oftentimes you regret it, right? So we want to get ourselves into a place where we hold our power. We be prepared. Sometimes we can see it ahead, like the Oscars. They could have seen ahead that some jokes might have been made about it, and what are they going to do as a team how are they going to have that thought process to handle that? Be ready for it. What things can you do to not react but respond? What mantra can you say inside your internal voice? How can you change that perspective? or knowing just what you need to do. If you can't control it, do you leave the room? Make a plan, right? So that you hold your power and you respond when you decide you're going to respond, not react and give away your power. So I thought this was a great front row seat to a trigger, but also a broader conversation of owning our identity and the empowerment of that. And also understanding identity issues, even when they are not, what's the word I want to use? Deadly, right? Cancer could be deadly, but not all identity issues are going to be deadly. It does not mean that they are less sensitive. It does not mean that people don't have trauma from these issues that they're dealing with. And so what's called for on our part is more sensitivity, more empathy, more love, and more kindness. And so this is not even to say that Chris Rock did anything wrong, because I don't think he did anything wrong either. He was being asked to do that, and he really wasn't insulting her. But he touched on something that was a trauma for her, and therefore a trauma for him. And some of that kind of DNA protection / I wasn't prepared to deal with someone hitting on her trauma, therefore my trauma hit a trigger for both of them. So more love, more empathy, more owning your own response versus reacting. Own the power by responding. And if you know that you have a trigger, focus on, what do you do when you're triggered? What is the mantra? What is the mindset? What is the action you might take? Maybe you start writing. Depends on what the situation is and where you're going to be and what's realistic, but plan something realistic that you can do for the moment you're going to be in, so that you are going to respond and not react. And if you have the luxury of this, tell yourself to log it, whatever that thing is that triggered you or is starting to trigger you, whether it's something someone said or something someone did. Take it in and say, I'm going to log it. I'm not going to react. And I'm not saying I'm not going to respond either. I'm not giving away my power, but I'm logging it. I'm going to log this. And I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to think about it again. And if it still bothers me, then that's a conversation. And if it doesn't bother me, I'm just going to see why it no longer bothers me, and I'm going to move on. But now what you've done is you've owned your power. You've not given it away. So I hope you've enjoyed this moment and this discussion. I thought it was great social commentary to use this moment of something that's going viral right now to talk about some really important things about empowerment and about triggers and about empathy and sensitivity. And I hope that you share this with other people. And I will see you next time in class. Again, Place of Bliss Academy on Udemy, Sufani Garza on Udemy. You can search me and find me there if you haven't taken any of my classes. And I will see you guys very soon in a next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're not already a member of Sufani's World on YouTube. Leave a comment and let me know what you thought about this. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.